The gravy had already filmed over, a translucent gray skin tightening across the porcelain boat. My mother sat at the head of the table, her spine a rigid line against the mahogany chair I had paid for 3 years ago. Beside her, Julian tore into a piece of sourdough, the crust crunching like bone between his teeth. He didn't look at me. He hadn't looked at me since I arrived. "The market is peaking," Julian said, swallowing a dry hunk of bread. "We've spent the last month running the numbers with the estate planners. It's time to consolidate." I rested my hands on the tablecloth. The lace was an heirloom, intricate and yellowing, smelling faintly of lavender and damp basements. Consolidate what, exactly? My mother's glass hit the table. The red wine sloshed, a dark stain blooming on the lace like a fresh bruise. The property, Elena, the lake house, the cottage in the valley, and the downtown units. All of it. We decided to cash out everything and divide the proceeds among us 3. She gestured with a ringed hand to herself, Julian, and his wife Sarah, who sat in the corner of the room, nursing a gin and tonic like it was a shield. "Us 3, I repeated. My voice sounded thin in the cavernous dining room. I wasn't aware I had been voted out of the family ledger. "You chose your path," Julian snapped. He wiped grease from his chin with the back of his hand. "You left this family 5 years ago. You moved to the city, started that firm, and stopped showing up for Sunday dinners. You made it clear where your loyalties lie. Why should you benefit from the sweat and blood Mom and Dad put into these lands? I moved for work, Julian, and I've paid the taxes on the Valley Cottage for the last 4 years. My mother sighed, a sound like air escaping a punctured lung. "Money doesn't replace presence, Elena. It doesn't stand in the doorway when something breaks in the house. It doesn't sit at the table when candles are lit for birthdays. It doesn't laugh, argue, or remember. You stopped showing up. What you send now is just compensation, a quiet way to ease whatever guilt you carry." The words didn't land all at once. They settled slowly, like dust in a room no one had entered for years. I sat there, still, listening as if each sentence had already been decided, long before it reached me. "We've already taken the next step," Julian added, his tone controlled but sharp beneath the surface. "The holdings are being dissolved, legally, properly. You're no longer part of it. There's nothing left for you here." The silence that followed felt engineered, deliberate. I looked at them one by one. My mother's expression was steady, almost clinical, as if she were reviewing a report instead of cutting ties with her daughter. Julian carried a tension that vibrated just under his skin, like something waiting to snap. And Sarah, quiet, observant Sarah, sat there without objection, her agreement expressed in the absence of resistance. They had rehearsed this. There was no hesitation, no searching for words. This moment had been built, layered carefully, until all that remained was delivery. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice level, almost detached. "That's it," Julian replied, not looking up as he pressed his fork into the plate with unnecessary force. "And don't waste time trying to fight it. We've already secured counsel, someone who understands how these things work, someone who understands legacy." Legacy? The word hung there, heavy with irony. I stood, the chair scraping harshly against the polished wood floor. The sound cut through the room in a way nothing else had. No one moved to stop me, no one softened. I didn't argue. There was no point. Arguments required uncertainty, and there was none here, only decisions that had already been sealed. The pain was there, of course, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just precise. A narrow, cold ache lodged somewhere deep enough that it didn't need to announce itself loudly to be real. I kept my expression still, controlled. I walked out without another word, passing through the foyer lined with portraits of people whose expectations had shaped generations, but who would never have imagined this version of their legacy. Fractured, transactional, hollow. Outside, the air wrapped around me, thick with heat and humidity. The night felt alive, but distant, like it belonged to another version of the world I no longer occupied. I had nearly reached my car when my phone vibrated. The sound was small, but it carried weight. I glanced at the screen. "Arthur," I answered. "Elena," he said, his voice gravelly, tired in the way that comes from years spent navigating other people's battles. "I apologize for calling at this hour, but something just came through the court system, and you need to know immediately." "What happened?" "There's been a filing. Your brother's legal team submitted an emergency petition." "For what?" There was a pause. Not hesitation, calculation. "They're requesting a partition by sale, not just for the trust assets, but for everything connected to you." I stopped walking. "Explain." "They've included your personal holdings, the office building, your residence, your independent investment accounts. They're arguing that those assets were built using family resources and therefore should be considered part of the shared estate." The words were clear, the implication even clearer. "They're trying to take everything," I said quietly. "Yes." I turned slightly, looking back at the house. Warm light spilled from the windows, soft and inviting from a distance. It looked peaceful, whole, untouched by what had just taken place inside. How much time? They've requested an immediate freeze on your accounts. If it goes through unchallenged, you could lose access to your funds within 48 hours. I exhaled slowly. Let them proceed, I said. Arthur didn't respond right away. Elena, they're not bluffing. I know. I shifted my weight, my gaze still fixed on the house. Do we still have the original documents from the 2018 restructuring? Of course, but they're contesting them. They're claiming your mother signed under pressure. I allowed myself a faint, humorless smile. Good, I said. Let them make that claim. The next 2 days blurred together into something sharp and relentless. Screens glowed, files opened and closed, numbers aligned, separated, restructured. They saw distance, they saw absence, they saw a daughter who had stepped away. What they never saw was what had been built in that distance. When everything had been falling apart years ago, when debt had begun to suffocate what remained of the estate, it hadn't been Julian who stepped in. He had been too occupied maintaining appearances, investing in ideas that collapsed under their own weight. And my mother, she had been grieving something more abstract than loss. Not people, not relationships, status. I had been the one who stayed long enough to understand the damage, long enough to fix it. The system I created back then had not been obvious. It wasn't meant to be. Layers of protection, ownership structures, safeguards designed not for conflict, but for survival. And now, for the first time, it would be used exactly as intended. At sunrise on Sunday, my phone rang again. I didn't need to check the screen. Hello, Julian. Silence, then breathing, uneven, strained. What did you do? There was no anger in his voice. Not yet. Only fear, trying to disguise itself. I'm not sure what you're referring to, I replied calmly. The properties, he snapped. The bank said, yes, I interrupted. I know what they said. They're gone, he said, disbelief cracking through his tone. They said the lake house and the city units were transferred months ago. Not transferred randomly, I corrected. Reclaimed, according to the agreement signed in 2018. That's impossible. No, I said softly. It's contractual. Everything shifted in that moment. The certainty he had carried into that dinner was gone. You can't just take family property, he insisted. I didn't, I said. I enforced terms that were already in place. Terms your side acknowledged when you filed your petition. He didn't understand yet, but he would. And when he did, it wouldn't be sudden. It would unfold piece by piece, like realization arriving too late to be useful. You connected everything, I continued. Your filing confirmed that my assets and the trust were one entity. That includes liabilities. There was silence again. Then, faintly, my mother's voice in the background, strained, panicked. The debt you secured last year, I said, the one tied to your expansion, it belongs to that same entity now. And since you defaulted, I let the sentence settle. I acquired it. The line went quiet in a different way this time. Not empty, collapsing. I'm your creditor now, Julian. The weight of that truth didn't need emphasis. Everything that followed moved quickly, not chaotically, precisely. Legal positions dissolved. Claims were withdrawn. Resistance faded as reality replaced assumption. By the end of the week, everything had shifted completely. The properties were no longer theirs. The leverage they thought they had never existed, and the narrative they tried to build, collapsed under its own contradictions. I sat in my office days later, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Movement everywhere, life continuing without pause, without concern for what had ended. Arthur entered, placing a file in front of me. It's finished, he said simply. I nodded. What happens next? He asked. I looked out at the skyline again. Everything that ties me to them, I said, is closed. There was no triumph in it, no satisfaction, just clarity, a clean, unmistakable understanding of what remained and what no longer did. My phone buzzed once more. A notification. Funds cleared. Transactions completed. Final numbers settled. I glanced at it briefly, then set it aside. For a moment, I sat there in silence, not empty, not relieved, just steady. The absence of noise where there used to be conflict. I stood, walked to the window, and watched as the last light of day faded into evening. The world hadn't changed, but something within it had shifted permanently, and for the first time, there was nothing left pulling me backward. No expectations, no debts, no roles to perform, only forward.